joining us right now to get more into the conversation about Sixers Hawks, the NBA playoffs, and more. Check out all of his work over at Bally Sports, at Scoop B on Twitter and Scoop B on Instagram. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Brandon Scoop B Robinson, joining us here on 97.3 ESPN. My friend, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Busy but good. How are you, man?
It might help if I stop the music playing. It's been a crazy day.
I believe it. Long day in the greater Philadelphia area, Philly tri-state.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting day. Listen, when you put that stat also on your Bally Sports article about how, hey, it's Joel and Seth and then nobody else doing anything in the second half of that game, to me, that is one of the greatest encapsulations of that disaster last night, because I said it yesterday. I said, you can't take your foot off the pedal. And now we've seen the Sixers do it twice. We saw the Bucks do it with the Nets. We saw Utah do it with the Clippers. What the heck is going on in the NBA? Teams have leads. They should win the game. You mentioned the probability is sky high, and then it's like, oh, we're just going to take our foot off the gas.
Yeah, it's interesting. Me personally, I'd rather be up with a solid 10 points in the half and continue to build that lead than get 26 points above and then drop it. To me, it's like a false insecurity, like moving into a new apartment complex and not getting an alarm system just because it seems safe. You got to kind of play hard in the second half. And the fourth quarter is really where the Atlanta Hawks did their damage in this game. And it's bad, all bad. Even looking from the perspective of not just Seth Curry and Joel Embiid putting up those crazy numbers, but Tobias Harris finished with 4 points. Ben Simmons had about 6 points and still almost totaled a triple-double. Furkan Korkmaz had about 8 points. And it just was not a good game. But I'm not ready to write the Sixers off yet. I'd like to see them try to get it to 7 games. But last night, man, they wet the bed.
They definitely did a lot of things. They dropped the ball. They wet the bed. They took their foot off the accelerator. They did a lot of things. But the thing that drives me nuts the most is Doc Rivers, when he was hired, said he wanted to have the number one defense in the NBA. Mm-hmm. This is 2 straight games now where the defense just seemed to stop playing defense in the fourth quarter. And you look at Doc Rivers on the sideline. He has a look at his face, I don't know what to do. You look at Joel Embiid. He has a look on his face like, I don't know if we're good enough. You have to wonder, either the Sixers team does get out of this round, is this going to be the last time we see this version of the Sixers on the court?
I know that if you go by what Elton Brand said last season, they were going to give it another run, for this coming season. And, I don't want to just write them off yet because they still have a game 6 to play. But if you take Elton at his word, I think that there will have to ultimately be some changes that take place. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There were conversations with, the likes of the Houston Rockets, the Toronto Raptors, the Golden State Warriors, and the Minnesota Timberwolves as it related to the potential of acquiring Ben Simmons. And the Sixers stood pat and they looked like the geniuses in the room, and I hope that continues. In Game 6 or Game 7, but we can't act like that didn't happen. And if there is a chance that one of those guys are let go, I do think it's more of a plausible argument that it's Simmons than it is Embiid. It's always been that way. I think Embiid encapsulates the heart and soul of Philadelphia, their team, their fans, and more. And but I want to focus on the task at hand because they still have a chance to win it. Game 6 coming up tomorrow, but they should have lost that game, man. They really shouldn't have. And I hope that doesn't come back to bite them in the butt.
Absolutely. And let's be realistic. For anybody who has any doubts about Embiid, Embiid is basically the modern version of Bill Walton combined with Hakeem Olajuwon at this point. I mean, the dude's amazing. He just has to stay healthy. Brandon Scoop B Robinson joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Now, speaking of this series, they're going back to Atlanta. Now, they've shown that they can play well in Atlanta. They can win games in Atlanta. There's no real definitive home court advantage for either team in this series. How do you think that translates, though, on Friday night? Because I think a lot of Sixer fans, they're already starting to sell the stock. They're already starting to check out. What reason do Sixer fans have to have hope that this does go 7 games?
Well, I think when you look at the game in Game 5, one of the things that came alive for Atlanta in a way that didn't happen before was I need the Sixers public address announcer to say his name, but Lou was the guy that really came alive, 15 points coming off the bench. But I also think defensively that the Atlanta Hawks were locked in, and it's almost like I feel like Atlanta used the strategy that Philly was using against them. Let Embiid score. In comparison to Philly just saying, let Trey score and let the fray kind of figure it out. And I think what happened to the Sixers in this particular game in Game 5 was it wasn't just Trey, it was also Lou Williams. It was also John Collins, who's really come alive in the last few games. You saw spurts of it in the last series against the New York Knicks. But I ultimately think that, even Danilo Gallinari getting key rebounds and getting key jumpers. And, I think that for the Sixers is all hands on deck. I also do think that they're missing the veteran presence of Danny Green. I think that the Sixers are lacking that guy. I think they're lacking a guy like Jimmy Butler that they should have kept a couple seasons ago that held them accountable in a way that you don't necessarily see. You see it, but you see it in different forms. Like, I think Tobias is that guy, but he's not Jimmy Butler as it relates to being a vocal leader the same. I think for the very thing that Jimmy Butler is criticized for is the very thing that makes him efficient and what makes him who he is. And I don't necessarily think they have that type of vocal leader in the same vein. But, the other thing that I'll add, Josh, is I think in order for the Sixers to be good or to win, Joel Embiid shouldn't have to score 36 points.
Yeah, and it shouldn't just be him and Seth Curry doing all the scoring either. I mean, that part was just ridiculous as well. Now, you and I have talked a lot about Tobias Harris, and I want to ask you about him because he had a rough night last night. But I've been a big advocate of him. I think Tobias, what we saw last night is not Tobias. I thought that was just
an anomaly. Game.
Yeah, he had a bad day at the office. Mm-hmm. My question for you is, I heard someone say today that they feel like Mark Jackson from NBC Sports Philadelphia played in the NBA. He believes that Tobias Harris, he's a little more of a system player, that he's not a guy who breaks the offense to demand the ball, and that Doc Rivers needs to run more plays for him. What do you think about that?
I know Tobias. He wouldn't disagree with you. He's not going to say it. So I think when you look at a situation with, a system where you have Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid, if the face of that team is Joel Embiid, the quietest guy or the kind of the low-key guy isn't going to say, at least in my mind, I can't speak for Tobias, but in my mind, give me the damn ball. That's more Keyshawn Johnson's lingo.
Right.
I heard the ESPN commercial before we came back from break. But, ultimately, man, I think when it comes down to Tobias Harris, in order for the Sixers to win, he's got to kind of take over in his own way like he did in Game 1 against the Washington Wizards in Round 1. I think he had 27 points or 37 points in that game. I think Tobias Harris does deserve the ball more. And I also do think when it comes to Mark Jackson, I have great respect for. I've seen him in and out of the arena during my trips to Philly at Sixers games. But I do think he's right that Tobias is a systems guy, and he's the right guy to play in a system because he played for Doc Rivers in L.A. So if anybody knows Doc Rivers' system is him. I do know that during his free agency period, a team not named the 76ers looking at him was Utah, which is a systems organization. I think he'd fit it in Indiana. And this is all speculative as it relates to just fit, not anything I've heard. But so I think if he's a systems guy, he should have no problem playing under Doc Rivers. And I also think that the Sixers have a chance to figure it out in Game 6, and Tobias should be part of that process.
Now, the Sixers, they're down 3-2. They're going to Atlanta. Game 6 tomorrow night, 7:30, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Tom McGinnis on the call here on 97.3 ESPN FM. You mentioned Doc Rivers. What is your level of culpability, blame you want to put on him for this team being down 3-2? Because there's some Sixer fans who are saying Doc's not the same coach he was in Boston. They kind of throw all that kind of stuff out there. So what is your perspective on the head coach, Doc Rivers?
I like Doc. I've always liked Doc. Doc is a good coach, but I also do think that when you look at Doc Rivers and the criticism that they had for Doc when the Clippers lost last season is some people have said he's mailed it in ever since he won a championship with the Celtics back in 2008. Now's a chance to prove people wrong. This Sixers team was slated to be the competition with the Brooklyn Nets in the Eastern Conference. Walk it like you talk it. So I like Doc. I'll always support Doc, but I think it comes down to winning at this point. And you can't to give the edited version, you can't digest what you ate 10 years ago.
Brandon Scoop B. Robinson joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, at Scoop B on Twitter and Instagram for all of your NBA coverage. You mentioned the Nets. I can't not have you on and not talk about the Nets because Kevin Durant probably had the greatest game of his life the other night. And that game is tonight. Folks can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN as the Nets try to close out the Bucks here. And I'm not saying Kevin Durant can't do it again tonight. But, man, is there somebody else on the Nets that can help him out a little bit tonight? Because Kevin Durant is amazing, and I think he is spending day by day, proving that I'm Kevin Durant, man, comment every single year. But, man, I don't want to see him go down shooting all the bullets in the holster by himself, man.
Blake Griffin, I'd like to see have a good game. But the other person on that list that needs to step up tonight is Joe Harris. This is the moment that they signed him for. They paid him more than most people may have, and he's been kind of quiet. I really feel like Jeff Green, at least from downtown, did a lot of the shooting that Joe Harris would normally do in the regular season. I know that he set a Nets record, and we're talking Jeff Green here. He set a Nets record coming off the bench for the most points scored by a Nets player coming off the bench, and that was 27 points. At one point, he went either 6 for 6 or 7 for 7 from downtown. A lot has happened in the last 48 hours. Excuse me for not having the exact number, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. But what I'll say to you is in order for the Nets to do well tonight, you have to continue to force Giannis outside of his comfort zone defensively. He in Game 6, in my opinion, Giannis fell in love with that fadeaway jumper at times when he could really bulldoze his way into the lane and even draw fouls. I think also Chris Middleton, you're going to have to see 25 to 35 points from him easily. You have to see, you don't have to worry about Giannis and his scoring production and filling a stat sheet. That's always going to be Giannis's game, but how he gets his points is going to be a factor. And also, I think the biggest criticism for Giannis in this series has been his free throw shooting. I think, the league has been kind of lax with, giving him lane violations and whatnot, or free throw shooting violations. But, I think that the refs are going to let them play, but I think they're going to be a stickler for just playing the right way this evening. I do expect the Nets to close it out tonight for the sake of Kyrie Irving and his health. They need to, so that he can find a way to be with his team at the right time. And, I'll add that it shouldn't just be on the big three to do well. And I think you've been seeing that through all 5 games so far. One night it is Blake, one night it's Jeff Green, and now it's Joe Harris's turn to step up for Brooklyn.
Forget about Mike James, too, man. He was Game 1.
I can't forget about Mike James. Mike James has been a goal of godsend for Brooklyn this season. When I first heard they signed him, I was like, you talking about, like, Mike James that played for the Pistons in the 2004 finals?
Right.
It's a different Mike James.
Oh, my goodness. Now, speaking of Giannis, I also think I ask you, you mentioned about the other things, but one thing you forgot about is the defense. Some people are saying, hey, Giannis needs to guard KD. Enough of this, PJ Tucker on KD thing. Where do you stand on that argument? Because I feel like there's arguments to be made on both ends. Obviously, PJ Tucker has a history of guarding Durant, but Durant's got about, 8 inches on him as well? Giannis, at least physically, would be a better matchup, but it seems like the Bucks don't want to have Giannis every time down the floor on him.
Yeah, I think at certain points you'd like to see that. I'm talking to the greater Philadelphia market. Sure, you remember the days of, the Sixers and the Lakers playing in the finals back in 2000 and or 2001, pardon me, and seeing, at times Kobe Bryant guarding Allen Iverson and vice versa. It wasn't just Ty Lue on AI the whole time. So I'd like to see at least some stretches of the game similarly where you do see Giannis on KD because, unlike PJ Tucker, Giannis has length on KD. And I would like to see that, his long arms being outstretched and making it a game. But like I said, I'd like to see the Nets close it out tonight. Defense from Giannis, from PJ Tucker, from you, from me, from the ticket boy. Ultimately, I'd like to see it's time because the Nets shouldn't have given up that game last Thursday, and they did. They should have given them that game Sunday either, and they did. It should have been long over by now.
Only thing I can promise you is defense. I don't know if I can do much else at this point, my physical ability. So
there you go.
Brandon Scoop B. Robinson, NBA insider, Bally Sports, joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at Scoop B on Instagram and Twitter. I can't not have you on and ask you about some of this coaching fiasco because, first of all, what is up with all of these? They're mutually parting ways. They're leaving the team. Whatever happened to coaches being fired? I mean, this is such a weird situation that's going on in the NBA right now.
I blame No Child Left Behind. Ever since No Child Left Behind, everything is a little softer on a croissant bun with the crust cut off. It's a new day. And yes, you're absolutely right. Parting ways and more is a very interesting dichotomy in the National Basketball Association.
Yeah. So what is your take on this? So in a period of 48 hours, the Athletic article comes out. You speak to Mark Cuban. You had all that information right there at Bally Sports. And then all of a sudden, about a day later, Rick Carlisle's like, I don't want to be here anymore. After Donnie Nelson says, I don't want to be here, or he was fired. I don't really know what really happened, honestly, but I'm asking you, what is going on in Dallas?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I got a call from somebody 2 weeks ago. It was a Friday. It was the day that Damian Lillard did the interview with Chris Haynes, and he told Chris that he wanted Jason Kidd as the next head coach of the Blazers. I got a call from somebody in the know, and they basically said that Carlisle is out of here. And that was the weekend that they played Game 7 against the Clippers. They said, if Dallas does not win, Carlisle is gone. I was like, you think so? He goes, yeah. So I left it alone. At the same time, I was hearing stuff about Jason Kidd. So fast forward to like today, I literally was in the bathroom washing my face, and someone texts me and goes, so is Kidd next? And then I got another text message from somebody in around the league that said, Carlisle has a job lined up already. And so I was on Instagram Live today doing my weekly thing with Bovada, and I was texting while I was on live, and they said, have you heard Celtics? I said, I heard that 2 weeks ago. They go, yeah, they're a big front runner. So I was quiet, but all the things that were coming out today was stuff that I had heard 2 weeks ago. And kind of was just like, when you heard, Mark Cuban say, that we're going to, stick with Carlisle, it seemed like they were saying all the right things. So I kind of left it alone. In the grand scheme of things, I think that Athletic article kind of shook up the soda quite a bit. And I think that the article about the guy in the front office, that's their shadow GM, my instincts tell me that it was time for Dallas to move on with that guy, and that there's a level of uncertainty with Luka as it relates to personnel and his long term. It's almost like he's young, you need new blood. And so I did talk to Mark Cuban a couple of days ago, and he did tell me that, that article was fictitious, and what he said off record I'll leave, but on record he said that the article was false. I think there's some truth somewhere in there, but I also do think that whenever you're citing a source, multiple sources who are saying various things, sometimes that person may have a gripe or beef with the particular person. I feel like those who were let go, and they needed to be gone. Now the Dallas Mavericks have the task of hiring their next coach. Jason Kidd is a name that I was hearing 2 weeks ago, and I've heard that that's part of the reason why he, in addition to Lillard lobbying for him, that's part of the reason why Kidd kind of stood pat. Kidd could take a job with the Lakers if Carlisle, if Frank Vogel and the Lakers don't come to some sort of resolution as it relates to an extension on his deal. So I think he's in a good position. He's also finishing classes at the University of Phoenix because if the college ranks come calling, you got to have a degree in order to coach. So it's a very interesting thing. Carlisle, from everything I've heard, Boston Celtics, former Celtic himself, it's an intrigue to potentially coach Jaylen Brown and others on that team. So that's what I've heard so far.
Yeah, also Carlisle is former Celtic, blood as well, so that makes sense. Jason Kidd also former Maverick as well. People forget about that. That was back then. He was
twice.
The first time he was Asen Kidd because he had no J. Remember,
Right.
Then he came back and then he was Jason Kidd because then he could shoot a three and they won a championship. So Jason Kidd would be very interesting there. Another job that's interesting is Portland. I'm hearing and seeing a lot about Chauncey Billups. Is that making sense to you?
I spoke to someone in the know last week who has said that Chauncey Billups wants that job and that it's a job that he wants. But I also will say another name that you should pay attention to if Damian Lillard has say is in David Vanderpool, who just stepped away from the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Right.
He should have been a candidate considered before they ended up bringing in another candidate in season. They brought the Toronto Raptors assistant coach in to replace their coach in season. And I'm told that, he felt disrespected about it. And he'll be looking for greener pastures. And Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum have a good relationship with David Vanderpool. He's played overseas. He's played in the NBA. He's very well respected and very accessible. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to names that are usual suspects like Mike D'Antoni, who's living his best life in Phoenix. I know he's interviewed for that position. Oh, excuse me, not Phoenix, with Brooklyn. He's living his best life with the Nets. And, he was a guy that was almost a hair's breadth away from being the next head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers once Doc Rivers became available. That's the thing. The Indiana Pacers were definitely an option. And I'll say this about the Pacers. A lot of guys pulled out of that whole Pacers interview position last year because of the owner, who is one of the oldest owners in North American sports. A lot of folks were kind of frustrated with that process. I'll leave it like that. But it's no surprise that the Pacers situation kind of went the way that it did. So that I know that Vanderpool was one of those guys that was interviewed in that position, and I think he's gotten his reps in practice in those interview processes. So hopefully Portland will come around. If not for Vanderpool or Mike D'Antoni, there's a lot of names that are going to continue to be floating around. The Orlando Magic is another team where a lot of guys are interested in that position. A young team, the chance to build that team. I personally think Jason Kidd would fit in Orlando.
You see me keep shaking my head over here on the video stream here, and that's because I'm done with the Mike D'Antonis. I'm done with the Stan Van Gundys. I'm done with these guys who keep getting chance after chance after chance, and it's like, what have they done to keep getting these multiple chances? Stan was one and done in New Orleans. Mike D'Antoni had success with 2 of 4 teams. I'm not including that one year that made the postseason with the Knicks. Let's move that to the side, okay? But to me, I don't understand why these guys keep getting opportunity after opportunity. Like, stop retreading these guys. Go actually think for yourself, NBA GMs and front offices and owners, and go hire a better guy, because obviously, how many championships does Stan and D'Antoni have? They have none. So I don't understand why these guys keep getting interviews.
There's a couple of reasons. One, name recognition. Everybody wants a name. And two, I think it comes down to your agents. Your agents advocate for you. I've seen it in broadcasting where certain guys have good agents, and they've gotten certain jobs that some have felt that they were not qualified for, and because they had a good agent that negotiated well, and because their kids played golf together or swam together, it was a good negotiation process. And I think the same goes with coaching in the NBA. I think it comes down to that. I think the bubble showed you. And I think particularly as it relates to African Americans and getting more opportunities, I think, I think that slowly but surely these owners or these governors, as they're called now, are going to have to open up the talent pool. I'll tell you that, with the Washington Wizards position, for example, Wes Unseld Jr. Has ties to the DMV. It would be a homecoming of sorts because his dad played for the Bullets, the then Baltimore Bullets. It makes sense. He's an African American. He's had success coaching, in Washington last year, in Denver last year as an assistant coach. He was a finalist in the Chicago Bulls coaching search last year. Ultimately, they went in a different direction. But I think that these jobs, slowly but surely, they're going to have to open in the next class of names, because you're going to keep, like you said, you're going to keep recycling the Stan Van Gundys, the Mike D'Antonis, and what have you.
Well, if they say that prejudice is the biggest problem in today's world, nepotism is probably the second biggest problem in today's world. Although I only hope nepotism works for one person, because Becky Hammon needs to interview for every job. Maybe Pop needs to go and retire and let Becky take over that job. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, I honestly think at one point I thought it was going to be Tim Duncan who would take over after Pop finally does retire. I think, Becky Hammon has had a great career in the WNBA and then transitioned well to a coach in the NBA, led the San Antonio Spurs, the summer team, to a championship. And at times when Greg Popovich was not coaching, either Duncan or Becky Hammon coached in his stead. And Becky Hammon has the respect of players. I also think when you look at just the Pelicans and the Blazers, even considering Dawn Staley, Philly's own, and also even Teresa Weatherspoon. Teresa is already in the front office with the Pelicans, or rather she's in an assistant coaching role with the Pelicans. And then you have, Swin Cash, who's also in the front office role with the Pelicans. I think there's a level of progression that's being talked about, but hiring is a horse of a different color, no pun intended. And I think that ultimately you're going to have to start making those moves. I'll add, even when you look at the Spurs and the Sacramento Kings, they were and even the Dallas Mavericks, they were ahead of the curve as far as the amount of European talent that came into the league. You look at the Peja Stojakovic's, you look at the Vlade Divacs, you look at the Dirk Nowitzki's. So if, with the Spurs bringing in cream of the crop talent and Becky Hammon as an assistant, hopefully, some of these other teams will follow suit in naming, women as head coaches in the league. It's time.
He's Brandon Scoopy Robinson, Bally Sports NBA insider at Scoopy on Twitter and Instagram. And he was kind enough to join us for an extended conversation here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. My friend, I appreciate you jumping on. I appreciate all the insights. And enjoy that Nets game tonight.
I will, brother. Thank you as always for giving me the opportunity to be myself.